Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Luke Freeman.
And I'm Chris Province.
And I'm Hannah Broderud. So this season, we are talking about intentional leadership, and we just wrapped up a whole little mini series on kind of the foundational concepts. And we're going to dive deeper in this month's topic. And I want to remind everybody, as you're listening, we're providing some great free resources for you to be able to follow along, reflect on the concepts and ideas that we talk about so that you can strengthen your own personal leadership journey for yourself and for the teams that you lead. So to get this month's download, a specific guide to this episode, go to magicintheroom.com.
That's right. And thank you guys for being on the leadership journey with us. Great resources there. And today we're going to talk about what we call the Iceberg Model. And really, this idea, as in support of intentional leadership, there's all these things that influence what we notice, the decisions we make, and maybe our courage to act. Mm-hmm. And those can sometimes be experiential. They can be things that are hardwired into us, just, our personality and how we're born. But why don't we start with a little bit about the model? Luke is our resident artist and the person whose graphics we always see on screen. Why the iceberg? Why is that representative of this idea?
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to start with just a little bit of a story because we're here in Montana recording, having a lot of fun together. And just in the last 24 hours, I've heard both of you tell a story about sitting at a bar with a seat next to you and someone comes up and sits next to you, and Hannah kind of was like, oh, I struck up a conversation. And now, like, I want to be her friend. You know her name, you know who she's related to. And you're like, she is awesome. And I want to hang out with her all the time. And Chris, had a similar story of just like, I always hear an interesting story. And as you guys were talking about those, I was just thinking like, this is like worst case scenario. Like if someone sits down next to me at an empty bar seat, I'm just like, shit, I sat in the wrong place.
More liquor.
Yeah. So like, I mean, the only place that I ever actually sit at a bar usually is like in an airport restaurant where there's not a table available, because I will always choose the table first, because the last thing my personality wants is to have to engage in some sort of conversation with a stranger. And I'm like, what is their expectation? And I don't really need anything from them. And I think the same way about people who sit down next to you on an airplane. And like, if my sensors go off, like this is a needy person, I'm just like, how quick can I put my headphones on? So I just tell that story to say the way that we all respond to the same scenario is very different. Mm-hmm. And those differences are based on our genetics, right? Who we are, our personality, much of which is hardwired, and our life experiences, the competencies that we've built, where we have experienced reward or punishment in the past. And I would say the way that we interact with people at a bar, I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong. I mean, you guys can tell me if I'm just super not friendly, I guess. But I think
super not funny.
Definitely don't have a sense of humor.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing. Thanks for the reminder. But the things that drive these, like, there's a difference in if we understand our personality and our life experiences that cause us to interact in situations in different ways, and if we're unaware. So when we talk about notice, choose, act as our model of intentional leadership, which we spent the last month on, really one of the primary things we have to notice about ourselves is what drives our day-to-day choices.
Nice.
And I like to use an iceberg, and we've kind of adopted this as our team. We like to use an iceberg model because most people know, an iceberg, you can only see, 10, 15% of it above the surface. And the rest of it is all underneath the surface, creating buoyancy to lift that little bit up above the waves. And I think in our lives, the things that other people see about us, and oftentimes the things that we see about ourselves, the person that we visually see when we look into a mirror, the person that we hear if we listen to a recorded version of ourselves, that's that 10, 15% that's visible, that's above the surface. People can say, Luke chooses to drive that vehicle. He chooses to live in that town. He chooses to do this as a profession. There's a little bit there that's visible. But our thesis here is that as people who want to be intentional leaders, the more we kind of don our, scuba gear and dive under the surface and really explore the nooks and crannies and all the unique things that are under the surface, giving buoyancy to rise those choices and observable actions and choices to the surface, the more we get to know the unseen drivers of our personality and the life experiences that drive us that we might not even be aware of, the more empowered we are to make choices that align with our values.
Yeah. And I think what you bring up there, Luke, is kind of the central point for this whole conversation. It's about raising our self-awareness, right? If we're going to be intentional leaders who lead ourselves with purpose, who lead others with purpose and intention, we have to know what are those sometimes often hidden things that impact our own behavior, right? And how we show up for others, how we show up for ourselves, how we show up for our family, how we show up for the teams that we lead, right? So it's about raising self-awareness, and that's really what we're going to kind of pull some threads on today.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of finish the illustration. I mean, for me, that person sitting next to me at the bar being like, oh no, what did I get myself into here? Like, I know that it's part of my personality because I've reflected on it. And I remember when I was 8, 9 years old, my grandma would bribe me and say, we're going to church today. Like, if you will talk to 5 people and interact with them and have a conversation, then I'll take you to Walmart and get you a Lego set. Right. And I would have to, sometimes it would be like multiple weeks, right? I like save up behaviorally for the Legos I wanted. But I had to undergo intentional training at that point to be socially adept enough to have a conversation with people that I didn't know intimately. Another piece of that is we'll get into strengths next month, but I know that one of my core strengths is I'm a relator. That's Gallup's strengths, version of this thing. And it basically means I go really deep with a few people, and my ability to go really deep and care about meaty things with those people that I'm closest to in my life is a real strength. And I think you see that come out like in our conversations on the podcast, but it comes with limitations. And so I only share all of that to say, for me, understanding some of that DNA and training that I've undergone and really having to choose, do I engage with this person or not? How do I engage with them? How do I make the small talk? Like, that's all informed by me being aware of those parts of who I am. Well,
and the powerful thing about what you just shared, though, Luke, is that most people that meet you today and the leaders that we interact with, and those of us who get to work with you every day on our team, we don't see that at all, right? I mean, that person that had to be bribed, the kid that had to be bribed to talk to even a single individual.
Bribery or positive reinforcement.
Sure.
I mean, choose how you want to label it.
Sure. We can, choose positively.
Yeah.
But that means that intentional awareness means that there's something different that has risen to the surface that's in the observable part of your iceberg, right? Because you became aware that this was something that maybe you needed to work on intentionally, you built a skill around it, and it still may not be your default mode, but it's something that you can flex into anytime that you see it And because I know another big part of your strengths are in the strategic realm, when you see it strategic to do so, you will be super friendly and outgoing and connect with people.
Strategic charisma. Yeah. But I mean, this whole episode doesn't need to be about me, but just another example, because this is pretty recent. We were doing strategic planning with one of our clients here and spending a couple days together. And the first day I wasn't feeling great. I had all these sinus issues going on and I was just not feeling myself. I was coming off kind of a hard couple weeks of work and just a lot of kind of stress. And when I get in that mode, one of the things that shows up above the surface that's observable is negativity and kind of just being a critic of everything. And so if I don't know my stress responses, then I'm not able to say, I'm just going to talk less today. So, I mean, Hannah and I, we were working on this together, and I'm sure you noticed that first day, we already debriefed this, so we know about it. But I just talked maybe half or even a quarter as much as normally I would. And part of that is where the group was and what we were going through. But also there were several times that I had something that I thought I wanted to share, but I was just like, Luke, you are not your best self. Hannah's got this. Just shut up and suffer through this. And your negativity will clear itself out, right? You're going to need to go for a walk. You need to get a good night of sleep. What you're thinking right now is not valid because your negativity and criticism is coming out, which is the shadow side of being strategic as well sometimes. So anyway, just another example of the more we're aware of where we go when we're really strong, what happens when we're stressed out or not at our best self, it does empower us to make decisions about how am I today? My level of tiredness, whatever, how do I interact in a way that aligns with my values and helps me and the people around me move forward to execute on our vision?
Yeah. And so as we kind of break into this conversation, I want to create, again, so much of the value of conversation. I think even in terms of leadership development or personal development, so much the value is in naming things, creating shared language, and developing more shared understanding around it. The thing I want to name coming out of the box here is probably our most profound bias. I mean, we're talking about experience and personalities, but our most profound bias as individuals is to think that other people experience life the way that we do.
Yeah.
And that creates a lot of conflict, right? Because if I assume that you have a similar worldview to me or you've had similar experiences to me, then I'm going to say, well, why don't you react like me? Why don't you do like me? Why don't you have the same sense of urgency as me? So I start framing the person and the character of the person based on my character. So maybe the first thing we need to do is understand there's not another person on earth that experiences life the way that we do or has the same personality that we do.
Yeah.
And the power in self-awareness is not about, oh, well, isn't that neat? I understand what I'm about and how I'm wired. The power of self-awareness is if I know where I am and I can understand where someone else is, I know how to meet them and where to meet them. But if I understand me and I understand Luke's position and his worldview, if I don't go meet him where he's at, I'm not leading. I'm just digging my heels in and being okay with the conflict. And we're never going to sink effort if that's the approach.
Yeah.
So interested in your take. How do you see that bias show up?
I mean, it's all day, every day, right? The biggest source of human conflict is in missed expectations. And often those expectations come from exactly what you shared, Chris. I'm expecting that you're going to see the world the way I do. Therefore, you're going to respond or react in similar ways to what I would do. And when you don't do that, I feel let down, or I feel disappointed, or I feel surprised, or sometimes even shocked at, but how could this be true? We both saw the same thing, or we're in the room at the same time, or we had I thought we had an agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many ways in which we interact with the world that are impacted by our personality and our experiences that make the outcome and how we respond completely unique to every human being, right? And that is helpful to know for us as individuals and as leaders, recognizing that the people that we lead, they may hear something completely different when I use a certain word or tell a specific story or give a direction, right? They may hear something different that's influenced by their personality, by their experiences.
Yeah, that is amazing, right? Key takeaway there. To the level of I say a word and I understand what that means, someone else will understand that word differently based on their experience and their personality. Leaders will confirm understanding.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and just to take another step, I can only be an effective communicator if I understand my own communication strengths and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
So if we all have communication blind spots and communication styles that emerge from our unique personality and our life experiences. And if we don't understand what my communication style is, we can't communicate in any other way until we're aware of it, until we notice it. It's really hard for us to modulate our delivery to be the right delivery to actually help people learn, grow, change, get the information they need, whatever.
Well, so kind of diving into the, we say experience and personality. Let's dig into that. What do you understand personal experience to be? Can we define that?
Well, it's any lived experience, right? It's from the family we were born into, our early childhood development, the community we were part of, the religious influences or upbringing, ethnicity, what country we grew up in, what part of the country, what socioeconomic status we have been part of, the professional experiences we've had, the jobs we've had or lost, the leaders we've worked with and for, and all of our colleagues. So it's everything in our lives that is part of our lived experience. And that's the really interesting part, and why, there are no two human beings that are the same or that have had exactly the same experience. We may have commonality with others, but when we think about diversity and what that actually means, and when you think about things like neurodiversity, no two human brains are wired the same way, because part of our hardwiring, our biology, is going to be different based on our genetics and the family we were born from. And then part of the way our brain develops is completely influenced by our experiences from birth until present moment. And that means every human brain is different. And like everything we've been part of in life influences how our brains develop.
I was thinking about just how experience shapes who we are, and just reflecting on my experience. And so I grew up in a mainline Protestant church in, Northwest Arkansas, went to college at a religious university, worked for a church institution for several years, and then worked for a religious nonprofit for several more years. And so when we talk about organizational design and organizational culture and organizational strategy that puts purpose first and results in higher levels of engagement, a lot of the models that I bring to bear are like how religious institutions have created narratives around shared purpose and use group norms and ritual and shared purpose to align people and get things done and fulfill their mission. And so I bring that into whatever context I'm in, whether it's a large publicly traded, company or a small mom and pop. It doesn't matter if it's manufacturing, construction, technology. When I think about how do we shape an organization to get things done, that's my context. And that doesn't mean like, oh, well, I'm going to make everything at church. Like, that's absolutely not what I want to do, right? But I have all of those experiences that are pulled into anytime I'm facilitating. And so for us to like co-facilitate together, me bringing that experience enriches us as a team. But it's important to know that, right? It's important to be aware of that context. So I don't know if that's a great answer to your question. I mean, that's just what jumped to mind for me, because I think the same is true for everyone. Our upbringing, where our first job was, what we did professionally the first 5-10 years of our career, it echoes throughout the rest of our lives and when we do interventions as leaders.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in this conversation as we're naming kind of the experiences where, personality and worldviews are born. I think a couple that, I'd throw in here is, okay, what was my participation in athletics? Was it team sports? Was it individual sports? Was I always at the top of the heap competing at the highest level? Or did I play recreationally? Like, what was I exposed to from a level of competitiveness, right? That's going to shape some of how I exist today or how I show up. Educational experience, right? And then generational experience, not only just local or kind of micro influence, but macro influence on a generational scale, I think is at play. And obviously ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. What is your count of those and how does that shape? So someone that is, kind of grew up without ACEs versus someone that grew up with ACEs. Did I grow up rural? Did I grow up metro? Like, what's all that look like? And it's just such an incredible stew. And so to think that someone else is going to respond to a stimulus the same way that I do is misguided and only leads to suffering.
Yeah, well, I love the sports metaphor, because when we think about every individual's personality experiences are under the surface, driving their behaviors that show up above the surface. I think about, as a parent going to any sports thing that my kid's at. And so you like watch the youth basketball game, and everyone in the stands, you could argue, they're in the same context with the same kind of raw input that they're seeing and hearing. So all those parents are seeing the same game, observing the same game. They all have a kid playing or on the bench, right? They all have a stake, but the varying responses in how people behave in that context, like any game you go to, you're going to have the yeller, you're going to have maybe someone with a cowbell, you're going to have the people that just sit there and kind of clap, and then you're going to have people who are more directly interacting with their kid that's on the bench, people who are more talking to the refs. Like, there's all of this variance in how people actually behave in that situation. And I think what we're arguing is that all those people have a below the surface 90% of their iceberg that's driving what we're seeing. And it's worth examining.
Right. Absolutely. It's a couple of words that I wrote down that I thought was helpful. We all have different gifts and gaps.
Yeah.
And what's under the surface are all of those, the stories of how they were created, and the story that should inspire us to want to connect with them sitting next to them at the bar. Right?
I hear a value judgment there.
Or the airplane. That's moral reasoning, sir. Or ethical evaluation, however you want to take it. And that's the whole thing. Like, it's not fair for me to expect Luke to want to talk to everybody that sits next to him at the bar.
Right.
Like, that's my job. That's based, because I'm the one that's inspired by other people's stories. I don't need to expect Luke to be inspired the same way. He derives inspiration from other places. So you can see, like, if I were to have that expectation of him, or he's like, well, Chris, you don't do this enough, or you don't do that enough. And, like, that's not helpful.
Yeah. And I'm like 50-50. Half the time, I usually don't want to talk to the person next to me on an airplane, because when I'm on an airplane, I'm either headed to or headed home from some kind of engagement that's going to require a lot of energy, social energy from me.
Uh-huh.
And so on the airplane, I just want to be and rest, maybe do some work, maybe focus on what I'm going to be talking about, maybe just read a book, maybe just zone out. When I'm at the bar, though, I'm there to intentionally interact. And, if Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire starts playing and some other lady in ski boots looks like she's kind of getting into it, I might just get up and dance. And
this may or may not have happened
yesterday. May or may not have happened yesterday. And I can make an instant connection with that other person because we got excited about the song. The mood was great. Yeah. There was a great energy. And, I don't know her name, but we made a connection and she's cool, right? And that was a shared experience that we were able to have. And there's part of my personality that led to that. Part of it is experiences that I've had in the past that get me fired up about some music, and I want to move.
Well, and I think we're really scratching around why all of this matters.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we break this up and let's all take some individual parts. I would like, Luke, if you can evaluate why this matters. Why does experience and personality matter for an organization? And Hannah, if you can kind of break down why do these things matter for a team? Mm-hmm. And then I'll kind of break it down on an individual level, and we can dive into kind of how it shows up in each of these functions. And let's work largest to smallest and say, what does it mean organizationally with all these different experiences and personalities trying to integrate?
Yeah. I think it's, for me, so key to connect with people on a under the iceberg way. And by that, I just mean to know something that's under the surface that maybe I wouldn't have guessed just by observing someone, what they look like, what their behaviors are even. To know something that drives them. I think it's critical because we need empathy. If we're going to align around a shared purpose as an organization, which I think all organizations should, if we're going to align around a shared purpose, we're going to have to leverage the strengths of our team to get as far as we can in fulfillment of that purpose. And, creating empathy is done most quickly by hearing people's stories. And there's a direct correlation between hearing people's stories and trusting their character. And once we trust people's character, we can really have conflict about strategy, about tactics, about how to get from point A to point B. So I guess all I'm saying is getting a glimpse into what's going on under the surface that's driving our team members directly leads to us being higher performing as a team. And maybe I'm talking about team too much here, but I'll try and get back bigger picture to organizations. I think for organizational leaders, if we're not modeling that in our senior leadership team level and in our relationship with our direct reports, there's no way it's going to be happening in other parts of the organization, unless it's maybe a pocket where someone else is on this intentional leadership journey. But I don't want to leave that to chance. So for me, if I'm an executive or I'm responsible for an organization, I really should be thinking about how do I give people opportunities to get under the surface with their team members on a regular basis. And that could be something as simple as we do recognition, but that recognition is based on character, not on tasks. Mm-hmm. So Hannah, when you danced to Ring of Fire the other day, I loved seeing people come up afterwards who like obviously had gotten joy from watching you dance and were just like, oh, you did that in ski boots. That was awesome. And like your impact on those people, it was a direct result of your willingness to like get up, stay in the moment, engage, be you, and find joy in this crowded bar in ski boots with someone doing an awesome version of Ring of Fire. And so, yeah, just that willingness to engage in the world in real time was awesome. So I say all of that just as an example of if I recognize that instead of, hey, great dancing. Obviously, you have some technical skill dancing. Everyone, let's give Hannah a round of applause because she was a good dancer. Like that's not as impactful. So it could be something as simple as how we do recognition on our teams, or it could be like we start every meeting with, tell me something good that's happened in your personal life.
Yeah. So I want to couch that a little bit and say, like, when organizationally, if we embrace character-based recognition programs that honors that person for being exactly who they are and for their impact, not for doing the thing.
Yeah.
But I see you doing something that positively impacts the people around you or our company, our enterprise, or our community. It confirms that who they are is meaningful to what we're trying to do here. And what better way to get engagement and discretionary effort than to make it okay for everyone to be exactly who they are?
Yeah. Well, and here's the rub of all of this is that that's almost impossible to do if you haven't put on the scuba gear and dived under the surface of your own iceberg. You know, if I'm not able to say my origin story that leads me to where I am in life today is this. Here's how I grew up. Here's some strengths that I have. Here's some hardships that I've faced. Here's something I stay up late worrying about. If I'm not able to share those things, it's going to be very difficult to ask other people to share them and build that organizational trust. So in some ways, this really does start with the individual and the courage of the individual to, one, put on the gear and dive under the surface and like really reflect and ask themselves what makes me me. And also then the vulnerability to show up in that way and like give people a glimpse of the things that they don't see just by looking at you and working on a project with you, right? It takes effort and you got to give first before you expect people to give it back.
Well, right. We will never get back anything that we don't give. The other thing I want to call out from what you're saying, the senior leader's personality is going to shape the climate for the entire organization. Mm-hmm. The question is it intentional or not intentional? Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
So we have to start with the work at the top level because this isn't work that's like, oh, that's for everybody else. That's not for me. No, it matters to everyone in the organization that every leader does the work as long as connectivity and values have a play in the business.
Yeah.
We have to do this sort of work. So, Hannah, thinking about it from the team aspect, where does personality and experiences, how might they show up in team dynamics in a different way than organizational dynamics?
So I'm thinking about something you mentioned earlier, Chris, about checking for understanding, right? So if we start out as a leader with the assumption that everyone on the team is going to have different personalities, different experiences that shape how they show up, I'm sensitive to that. Recognizing that if I see a reaction from someone in a given situation that seems disproportionate to the event that just happened, my question isn't, what's wrong with you? My question should be, what happened to you? And in a future episode, we're going to talk more about, adverse experiences and trauma that impact our stress responses. But I think it's helpful in this context for this conversation to recognize that when people react in certain ways, that isn't how we would react, right? There's something that has happened, some experience that that this person has had that has made them prone to being extra sensitive. So we all have different sensitivities. Every person is sensitive to different things. And being aware of that is helpful as well. So when we do look at neurodiversity, for example, a brain that has ADHD can be extremely sensitive to certain stimuli and get really easily overwhelmed in some contexts. And also maybe not be sensitive to other things, right? They might be able to have really hyper focus in certain contexts and be completely distracted or overwhelmed in other contexts. Again, recognizing that as a leader, that when people behave in ways that seem unpredictable or disappointing or in ways that are unexpected, having the courage to have the conversation with the individual of really talking about how are you really doing, not what's wrong with you, why are you doing this, and that also starts with ourselves, like asking ourselves that question, right? Instead of berating ourselves for what's wrong with you, having some grace and having some compassion and leading with connecting compassionately with ourselves first, so that we can also connect with compassion with those we lead.
All right. And so I want to kind of bring this home by saying, at the organization level, the climate can be set and the intention to recognize people based on their character is established. But the organization itself cannot provide direct care or stewardship to individual members. The organization is this thing, this existence,
An
this
entity.
being, an entity. Like the courage for love, care, and stewardship starts at the team level. And it's those team leaders understanding that diversity that allows for the type of care that will advance the person's development, skills, integration, outcomes for that team.
Yeah. So I think about performance management, for example, right? And many attempts have been made to quantify performance management, quantify performance. And, I wouldn't say it's an outdated practice, because it's still very much common practice to try to assign a number to someone's performance, right? And I sat down with a leader recently who talked with some pride about this performance management program that they had put into place, where everybody got a number. And they got a number based on, meaningful metrics like value alignment and, how well they, how much they cared, and as well as technical knowledge, right? And it became kind of a eye-opening experience for this leader who, and yes, it's a technical organization with a lot of individuals that come from finance and technical backgrounds. So they're used to thinking in terms of numbers and quantifying things, right? And I started asking some questions around, that, and the leader said, but if we don't put a number on it, how can we measure it? How can we measure performance? And that is a really good question. It's a complex question, right? And my invitation was to, let's think about this more qualitatively than quantitatively. The first question I asked was, so when you as leaders sat in a room and decided on the number for this person, on the scale of whatever scale they used, did you ask the team member for input first? Did you ask them how they saw their performance? And this leader goes, no, I hadn't even thought about that. And I could see the wheels started turning, right? And so how can we create a conversation if the conversation is the relationship, establishing a relationship with the individuals that we lead means we ask for input. We ask for their input. We ask, what do you see? Because as we've established, each individual will see the world differently, and they'll have different perspective on their own performance, why they performed well, why they didn't perform well. And having that kind of dialogue in a performance review is way more powerful than coming in and say, well, we as leaders decided that you scored a 2.8 out of 5.
No, but what the person hears isn't you scored A. What the person hears is you are A.
Yes.
2.8.
And in fact, that's in this conversation, in this example, I said, I feel it can become a little alienating for people when they're being told they're a number. And the leader shared back with me an example of exactly how that had happened. When someone became aware of what score they'd been given, and it basically equaled to what the team member interpreted as a B, right? And they're like, well, what do you mean I'm a B? Like, I have never made a B in my entire life. Like, I'm not a B student. How can I be a B? And the leader was, well, this is like one of the highest scores of everyone, right? But there was such a disconnect between what the team member experienced and what the leader intended, because they didn't check for understanding. They didn't ask for input. They didn't ask for the perspective of the other person.
Yeah. And you're triggering me because of my personality and experiences, right? So just a little watch out. If someone says they're triggered or acts like you're like, oh, I'm triggering that person, there you go. Red flag. There's something under the surface of the iceberg that's causing that. And for me, we already talked enough about me, so I'm not going to say why, but I will just say leaders who outsource the emotional labor and aren't willing to do that only want to quantify and do cognitive labor with their teams and not emotional labor with their teams. And what I mean by that is, oh, we're having a performance issue. Let's get the HR business partner in so they can help me understand how to walk through this. Or this person's home burned down. Hey, can we have HR email them about what the employee assistance plan is? And I'm not quite sure how to talk to them about it. Like, those leaders are people who haven't put on the scuba gear, right? They don't understand themselves enough. They're not comfortable with what's under the surface of their own iceberg enough to have the courage to look under the surface of someone else's and have conversations about those things that drive other people's behavior. And if we're going to be transformational leaders, we have to be comfortable with what is driving us under the surface for us, and also comfortable going under the surface with other people. That's the definition of being transformational. Willingness to go under the surface with people in the interest of all of us winning and progressing together. The definition of transactional is like, we only stay up top. You don't need to know anything besides what's above the surface for me. I don't need to know anything besides what's above the surface for you. We transact.
Right.
And just to put it even finer point on that, if we as leaders are uncomfortable with the emotional responses or reactions of our team members, it's often an indication that we're uncomfortable with our own emotion. And if we do not have the courage to look under the surface of the iceberg of what is causing that in us, we have no place in trying to lead others, because it goes back to self-leadership. If I cannot lead myself and I don't have the courage to raise my own self-awareness of what's driving me and my own reactions and discomfort with other people's pain, discomfort, hurt, joy, whatever experience they're having, right? I am not in a good position to lead someone else if I cannot lead myself.
Right. And that's kind of thinking through why these things matter to the individual or individually. I think it's about, the experience and personality of people influences how, and I'm going to use the word how I build relationships, my ability to openly love and care for other people is shaped by these things. The sources for my personal strengths are born by this. My mindset about what is possible is shaped by my experiences. My level of gratitude or appreciation for little things and little wins. I really liked what Luke said earlier about buoyancy.
Yeah.
Like, how buoyant is my pursuit of fulfillment? Like, that is shaped by my experiences. And I think about purpose, my ability to achieve a designed purpose. And what I want to name is my morals and ethics were shaped by, or are shaped by, my experience and my wiring, and how those two things interact. Therefore, how I reason, my moral reasoning, is shaped by how I'm wired and what I've experienced, and my moral intensity is shaped by that. And I think I kind of evaluate this as, does my moral intensity match that of the organization, community, or family that I'm a part of? And vice versa. If I'm the leader within a team or organization, looking at someone else and say, can this person's moral intensity, can they be as passionate about the greatest good that we're trying to accomplish here? And if that is a no, I have to think hard about if that's a feasible candidate for a position within this enterprise or on this team. So, those are kind of the component parts as I see it, is why does it matter individually? It's about the moral development that's born of it, the personal strengths that are born, the ability to build healthy, close relationships, the gratitude or appreciation they have for the little things that guide to fulfillment, and what they believe is possible, right? What is their level of hope versus cynicism? I think that is all born from that space, and why these things matter so much, as we think about team performance, organizational performance, and individual performance as we self-direct and try to design a life that's intentional. So with that, I want key takeaways from today. What did you guys hear? What did you enjoy interacting with? And then we'll wrap this and get after it another day, because there's still plenty to explore around this idea.
Yeah. Well, for me, this idea of the iceberg has been really helpful for me personally. And today was just good to kind of as a reminder to myself, because what I want is to be intentional about what does show up above the surface. How do people interact with me? What's the experience they have of me? And, how do I leave them feeling? What knowledge do I leave them with? Do they feel invited to some sort of next step on their journey because of conversation with me or an experience with me? So I'm serious about being intentional about that being the stuff that shows up above the surface, above the waterline. But I know the only way for me to really craft what shows up above the waterline is to address the things giving it buoyancy that are underneath, that are pushing up towards the surface. So yeah, it's a great reminder. This work that we all have to do, it's continuous. And I'm leaving this just feeling, just reminded and maybe a little bit more focused for myself.
Yeah, and I think as we revisit this together in a later episode, I want to talk about how we go about that work and really diving into doing that work as leaders. But as I leave this space today, I'm thinking about the way that I'm wired and the experience that I've had and the gifts I've been given and the gaps that are still there, and how unfair it would be for me to expect you to duplicate the gifts that I've already received or to expect you to fill the gaps that still exist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, those are my own struggles. Those are my own journeys. Those are my own experiences. And if I can somehow shape or frame the world in a way where I ask, how can I provide gifts to other people? And how can I fill their gaps? Then it makes the world extremely fair and fulfilling. And I think I can be more buoyant in my pursuit and ultimately fulfilled. Yeah. So Hannah, what are you walking away with? And why don't you just wrap us up for today?
Yeah. So for me, it comes back to this idea of raising self-awareness and how every person's leadership journey starts with reflecting on their lived experience, their shared experience, in order to take emotional responsibility for our own experience, how we see the world and how we interact with the people around us. And that starts with, having the courage to dive below the surface, look at what's happening below the surface in my iceberg, and shining some light on that to raise my personal self-awareness. And to help with that, we've created a personal reflection guide. And so as a reminder, go to magicintheroom.com. If you would like to share this resource, it's completely free. You can download it, and it's a tool for you to help with that reflection, to be able to surface your own awareness of what's driving your behavior and even the behaviors of the people around us. So really excited about this whole series that we're exploring this month. Next conversation is with evolutionary psychologist Annette Taylor. We're going to dive a little deeper into the impact of experience and emotion on our behavior. So you can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, at LinkedIn, on Facebook, and brand new, we have an Instagram account now too.
Insta.
Purpose and Performance Group. Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Braderud, and Luke Freeman. Produced by Ben West. Social media support by Emma Holland and Michael Manfredi. Our theme music is by Evan Grimm. Find his music on Apple Music. This episode was recorded on site in Big Sky, Montana. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. Find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. You can find previous episodes at magicintheroom.com.